All right, hello everybody and welcome to Phoenixville Public Library, those of you in our community room and those of you who have joined us on Zoom tonight. For our presentation, we're really pleased to have back with us local historian Jim Segrave-Daly, who has been a volunteer history teacher for 15 plus years, a member of the Radnor Historical Society, the American Revolution Roundtable of Philadelphia, America 250 PA Delco, and Founding Forward, which is an organization that promotes civics grounded in the founding principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which happens to be the title of our program tonight, exploring the document that's celebrating its 250th anniversary this year, the Declaration of Independence. So welcome to all. Those of you on Zoom, feel free to chime in with any questions or comments. You can either unmute yourself or type in the chat and I will relay the question or comment to Jim. Without further ado, Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for everyone who braved the heat, and those of you who were home in air conditioning, we're jealous, but thank you for joining. As Mark said, my name's Jim Segrave-Daly. Just my history street cred, I have a BA in history from Penn State.
You're not eating, Graham? No.
Please mute yourself. Thank you.
If you can mute yourselves, that'd be great unless you have a question. We don't want any family secrets revealed on Zoom. My family has ties to the Revolution. I have a fourth, two fifth, and a sixth great-grandfather who all served. My fourth great-grandfather was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine in September of '77. He then served in Germantown, and he was then part of the Radnor Picket, which was the force that provided protection and intelligence to Washington and the troops when they were at Valley Forge and the British were in Philadelphia. I love it because it gives me bragging rights over my wife who grew up in Radnor. So I can say my family was in Radnor 200 years before hers was. So always a good thing. So if you can't tell, this is going to be somewhat informal. Again, any questions, comments, please, as Mark said, for those on Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself and ask or type it into the chat. And folks here, please ask questions at any point throughout. So what we're going to talk about is, it's literally 250 years ago today that the Second Continental Congress approves the Lee Resolution from June 7th of 1776. The photo that I have up is of Richard Henry Lee of Virginia. Richard Henry Lee is from a noted family, Virginia family. Their land holdings to this day, you can go down and visit them. They're known as Stratford Hall on the northern neck of Virginia. Richard Henry Lee is a noted orator of the time. What's important is he is a Virginian who puts forth the Lee Resolution talking about breaking from Great Britain. Up until this point, the mindset was that most of the momentum for the Revolution was coming out of New England, right? We have Lexington and Concord in April of 1775. We then have Bunker Hill in June of 75. 2 days before Bunker Hill, which happens on June 17th, so on June 15th of 1775, the Continental Congress appoints Washington commander-in-chief. Very important. One, he's got the most military experience of anybody pretty much in the country, so it's a low bar. But more importantly, he's a Virginian. So what that does is it brings Virginia is the largest, most powerful colony out of the 13, politically, economically, you name it. What it does is it brings both halves of the country together, having him as commander-in-chief, even though he didn't think very highly of the New England militia when he gets up to Cambridge in early July of '75. Richard Henry Lee, whose cousin is Light Horse Harry Lee, one of Washington's favorite generals in the war. He is the head of cavalry during the Revolution. Light Horse Harry Lee has a son. Any guesses who his son is? Robert E. Lee is Light Horse Harry Lee's son. If it was a Hollywood movie, you wouldn't believe it, right? And we know what Robert E. Lee does. Robert E. Lee's wife is granddaughter of Washington's wife. So a lot of connections here, right? Richard Henry Lee, however, on June 7th, as the Continental Congress is meeting, and again, it's not a slam dunk that independence is going to be the ultimate object here. You have many in the Continental Congress, particularly from Pennsylvania, which is a very conservative state at the time, and different from what conservatism means today, much different, right? John Dickinson, who is a big name, and I'm gonna go ahead on my slide very quickly here. This is John Dickinson. John Dickinson, for whom Dickinson School of Law at Penn State is named. John Dickinson donates the land that Westtown Friends School is built on in Westchester. He is a noted lawyer of the time. After the Townsend duties are passed by Parliament in 1768, which put taxes on lead, paint, tea, and glass, he writes a treatise. It's called Letters from a Pennsylvania Farmer to the British Inhabitants of North America. Very catchy title, but he, from a legal standpoint, says the British cannot do this. They cannot tax us. No taxation without representation, right? So Dickinson, when we are now in June of 1776, thinks it's too early to declare independence. He thinks independence should be declared at some point, but his fear is that the British Army and Navy is going to mop the floor with the Continental forces and militia units. So he's not quite on board yet. What gets everything started is on June 7th, when Richard Henry Lee puts forth what is known as the Lee Resolution. Again, he's a Virginian, very important that he is the one to state the following, quote, resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. There's your Declaration of Independence, right? Thomas Jefferson, word for word, copies the Lee Resolution and inserts it into the Declaration of Independence towards the end. The resolution goes on that it is expedient forthwith to take the most effectual measures for forming foreign alliances, talking to France, talking to Spain, talking to the Dutch, right? And then last but not least, that a plan of confederation be prepared and transmitted to the respective colonies for their consideration and approbation, unquote. So think of, and we've all seen the join or die snake that is cut up into different pieces, right? That is, and so that first is published by Ben Franklin in the Pennsylvania Gazette in 1754. And what he's talking about at that point is the colonies coming together with Britain to fight the French in the French and Indian War, which begins in 1755, pardon me. Now, he's talking about that, join or die, we've got to come together. And the way you can think about it, a more contemporary comparison, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. You had some of the larger colonies saying, why do we need Delaware? Why do we need New Jersey? Why do we need And what Franklin is saying is we need everybody, right? And this is also what the other founding fathers who are moving towards independence are talking about. If we aren't all together, the British are going to target those colonies that do not support independence. They may use them as bases of operations, they may, whatever it may be. During the Revolution, the general thought is that 1/3 of the population supported the cause, 1/3 of the population were loyalists, and 1/3 of the population were apathetic and were literally saying who won the last battle, right? Because they want it to end. They think Great Britain is fine, it's okay to be with them. They're kind of, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but they're not pro-independence, right? And they're thinking more from an economic standpoint, hey, we have it pretty good here in the colonies. Why are we going to war? So not a ton of support amongst them. And in those three groups, you see shifts, right? Now, in some local areas, it might be higher. It might be 40% are patriots and 25% are loyalists and vice versa. But generally speaking, and with the outcomes of battles and what happens, you will see people who are loyalists become patriots, vice versa, and some who are apathetic say, hey, you know what? I'm now supporting the British or I'm supporting the cause. So a lot of shifting alliances here. So as soon as Lee puts this forward, it's like a bomb going off in the Continental Congress. You have John Adams, who is known as the Atlas of Independence. It goes back to Greek and Roman mythology, right? Atlas. He is the smartest man in the Congress. Ask him. He will tell you that, right? John Adams is his own biggest fan, which is something I think I have in common with him. My wife would tell you that. But Adams is the guy they go to again and again to say, how do we move? What do we do? And Adams understands that he can't be at the lead of this, right? Because when the first Continental Congress meets, it's after the Coercive Acts, it's after the Boston Tea Party, right? And many of the colonies look at Massachusetts as an issue, saying these guys are hotheads, they have to, they can't be driving the boat on this, so to speak, they can't be in the lead, and Adams recognizes that as well. He knows that other colonies have to step to the front, and truly, the fact that it's Virginia is so important. Virginia, when the Second Continental Congress is meeting in the spring and summer of 1776, supports independence the most out of all of the colonies. Very important. The first colony to give their delegates direction to support independence is North Carolina. There's what's known as the Mecklenburg Declaration out of Mecklenburg, North Carolina in April of 1776. And they say to their delegates, we're down, go for it, okay? Support independence. When Jefferson comes to Philadelphia in the spring and summer of 1776, he don't want to be here because all the action is in Williamsburg, where the House of Burgesses is meeting. Patrick Henry, huge name, right? Give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry is not at the Continental Congress, he's in Williamsburg. And Jefferson comes up and he doesn't want to come up, they say you have to go up, and he's like, okay, whatever, nothing really big is going to happen here. Little does he know, right? So, after the Lee resolution is put forth, you have colonies, particularly Pennsylvania, who says, we want to table this for 3 weeks. We don't want to consider it, we want to talk about it amongst ourselves, but don't put it up for vote. And John Dickinson is one of those names. John Dickinson and John Adams are at loggerheads. John Dickinson is the author of the Olive Branch Petitions to the King. Initially, English subjects think that King George III is ordained by God. So they don't see him as the issue, they see Parliament as the issue, right? And who's passing all the taxes, right? It's Parliament. So they're reaching out to the king saying, you're benevolent, we are your subjects, we want to stay with you. But after the Boston Tea Party, when Great Britain says to the colonists, if you pay for the tea, we're good, and Massachusetts says, we're not paying for any tea. So that's where everything falls apart, and the king then flips to, we've got to end this. We have to crush this. And think of it, in history, there's really no example. You can go back to Rome, but Rome truly, the empire ends because it becomes so big. It falls in on itself. And that's the fear, even though they're called a Continental Congress, right? The continent is what? Maine to Florida, and not even Florida because that's owned by Spain, Maine to Georgia, and out to maybe Pittsburgh, right? So, and they're thinking, how are we going to govern such a large area? These are things that the Founding Fathers are talking about. So, they table the Lee resolution, they then put forth the Committee of Five. And the Committee of Five is Ben Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman from Connecticut, and Robert Livingston from New York. They initially are thinking that Adams is going to write the Declaration. Adams says, it can't be me, it's gotta be Jefferson. And Jefferson says to him, why do you want me to write it? Adams says there are 3 reasons. I am obnoxious and nobody likes me. He says 2, and all of this is hard for Adams to say, right? 2, you are a Virginian, and a Virginian must be at the lead of this. Adams gets it, right? Optically, it's gotta be a Virginian. And then he says, 3rd, you write 10 times better than I do. So again, all very hard stuff for John Adams to say. Thomas Jefferson says, okay, I'm gonna do it. He's renting a room at, I believe it's 5th and Market, which back then is basically the end of the city. Imagine today, right? I mean, if you were at 10th and Market, you may as well be on the moon because you're in the boondocks, right? Because everything was so close to the waterfront. So any guesses from our folks on Zoom or here, how long it took Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence? Shout it out. How many?
3 days?
Close, 2 days, which is amazing, right? Now Jefferson plagiarizes. He takes a lot from Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke, Montesquieu, David Hume, but he also takes things from Richard Henry Lee, and he takes things from other state constitutions. John Adams actually, earlier in 76, in the spring of 76, wrote Thoughts on Government, which talked about how to move forward. So he takes things from everywhere, right? Most people know the Declaration from the opening, right? Which we will be reading at the end of this. Perfect way to end this talk. But what Jefferson then does is he submits it to the committee members and they edit it. They make 86 edits to it. Every one is like a cut to Jefferson's soul. He's offended by every change they make. One of the big changes that are made, is Jefferson initially uses the phrase, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. And Franklin says, that doesn't have enough juice. It doesn't have enough power. So he changes it to self-evident, right? Because John Locke, in his treatises on government, he talks about natural rights. And natural rights are what every one of us are born with, right? Now, of course, back then, if you're a white male landowner, you're the cream of the crop, right? Women don't have the same rights, blacks don't have the same rights, Native Americans don't have the same rights, but that is why Franklin says change it to self-evident, so that it can't be questioned, right? The other big change that's made, Jefferson writes a paragraph. So there's a list of 27 grievances against the king in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson includes a 28th on slavery, blaming King George. Bit of a stretch, right, to blame King George for the slave trade. The southern colonies come back to him and say, if you leave that in, we're not signing. And although you only need 9 colonies to sign, they want it to be unanimous. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says the unanimous declaration, right? And that's exactly what it ends up being. New York actually ratifies it after the fact because their delegates were not given any direction, and they have a provincial congress a couple of weeks after the declaration. Once they have it, they say, yes, we are on board. Pennsylvania, however, continues to be wobbly on it because of the conservative faction. So we talked, and sorry to keep changing the slides on you here, folks. Here's Dickinson, who we talked about. The other gentleman from Pennsylvania, who initially does not think it's a good idea, Robert Morris. Robert Morris is the financier of the Revolution. Morrisville, Pennsylvania is named for him. His home, summer seat, which if you've ever been to Morrisville is on a high point. Washington stays there before the First Battle of Trenton and actually starts to plan the First Battle of Trenton at Robert Morris's home. Robert Morris is one of the richest men in America. His father was a successful tobacco planter and trader, also a slave trader, right? Robert Morris, after the First Battle of Trenton, when Washington fears that a large part of his army is going to melt away because enlistments end literally in about 4 days, Washington brings them out and says, and he says it a heck of a lot better than I'm going to say it right now, but Washington says, my good fellows, your country needs you. You've already sacrificed so much. We need you to sacrifice more. If you stay one more month, we'll pay you $10 each. That $10 each comes from Robert Morris's personal finances, because the Continental Congress has no power. They can't tax, right? Good old days. They can't do anything, really. It's colonial governors who have more power than the Continental Congress. Morris actually goes bankrupt after the war. One, because he's never reimbursed. Two, he buys basically all of Western New York. He buys 6 million acres. Right before he dies, he is thrown in prison, debtor's prison. Can you imagine if there was a debtor's prison today? It'd be packed, right? But he goes into debtor's prison because the value of his land is not worth what he paid for it. Congress in 1800 passes a bankruptcy act to get him out of prison, which they do. He dies in 1806 holding these worthless lands that skyrocket a decade later when the Erie Canal was built, right? So crazy. But Robert Morris initially also says, we cannot declare independence yet. We are not ready for this. Yes, I support it, but the British Army and the British Navy, 10 years before, a little bit more, 12, 13 years before, had just defeated the French in the French and Indian War. And his thought is, how are we going to do this when we have these 13 different colonies trying to come together? Again, join or die, right? So Morris ultimately signs the Declaration of Independence, but was not on board at first. So this portrait, one of the most famous portraits in American history by John Trumbull, this actually shows the Committee of Five submitting a draft of the Declaration to the Continental Congress to approve it. So total time taken from Jefferson writing to all the edits done, 17 days. Our government can't name a post office in 17 days, right? That's another talk for another time. But just, you think of this document, and pardon the pun, revolutionary document, right? 17 days, amazing. So they come forward on July 2nd, and 250 years ago today, the colonies ratify the Lee Resolution, even though Pennsylvania is still iffy on it. What happens? Dickinson, who has written olive branch petitions, and the king initially reads the first one, the second one, as a show of disrespect to Dickinson and the founding fathers, doesn't even accept it. So, and to John Adams, who's saying to Dickinson, you're wasting your time, they're never going to accept this, when the king basically denies accepting another version that Dickinson sends to Adams, that's the nail in the coffin. On July 2nd, 2 men signed the Declaration of Independence. Who's got the biggest signature on the Declaration? John Hancock, right? He signs it, and Charles Thompson signs it. Charles Thompson is the recording secretary of the Continental Congress. Charles Thompson lived in Bryn Mawr at Harridan House during this period. So they are the only 2 to sign it on July 2nd. There's the famous quote by John Adams, July 2nd will be remembered forever. There will be bonfires and illuminations and all these things. Well, we know what happens. It's July 4th, and primarily because that's when the Dunlap broadsides are printed, right? Is on July 4th. The first reading of the Declaration takes place in the Pennsylvania State House yard. Independence Hall at that time was called the Pennsylvania State House. It's read on July 8th. Washington reads it to the troops in New York City on July 9th. About a decade beforehand, after the French and Indian War, the colonists paid for a gilded statue of King George on a horse on the Bowling Green in Manhattan, basically lower Manhattan today. After the reading of the Declaration of Independence on July 9th, 1776, they tear the statue down and melt it to make bullets used during the Revolution. So again, just a quick turnaround here. Thomas Paine, we're going to talk about for a couple of reasons. So July of 76, right, is when the Declaration is ratified and accepted by the colonies. And we'll get to the dramatics of it. Paine, in January of 76, writes Common Sense. January 9th, 1776, it's printed at Front and Market Streets in Philadelphia in Robert Aitken's print shop. You can go to the building today. There is a sign hanging out front, site of where Common Sense was printed. Famous line, there are many in Common Sense. You can get Common Sense at the library. It's an 80-page read. It is phenomenal today. Unbelievable. Paine, one of the famous first opening lines is, we have it within ourselves to change, to make the world new again. And what Paine is talking about, it's not only independence, he's talking about women's rights, and he's talking about emancipation. So, we know what happens, the result of the American Revolution, right? We obtain our independence. Paine, Aaron Burr, Lafayette, all go to Washington after the war and say, wait a second, what about emancipation? How can you own slaves? What about women's rights? And Washington basically admits, hey, we dropped the ball. We should have gone for the whole enchilada, right? I'm sure Washington didn't say the whole enchilada, but Paine plays such an important part. Common Sense is written in very basic language. Back then, writers would try to show you how smart they were, right? By using florid commentary, right? Paine, plain and simple. Literacy rates in the colonies at that time were higher, relatively speaking, than they are today. Reason for that is the Puritans stressed reading and education for men and women. Back then, most people, the overwhelming majority of people are farmers. You're working at least 6 days a week, right? Dawn to dusk. What's the one day a week you probably aren't working as much? Sundays, right? Where are you going on Sunday? Church, and then afterwards you might go to the tavern. Now, taverns back then, a little bit different than taverns today. Yes, you could go and get a drink, but many people went for a meal. Taverns are also boarding houses. Churches and taverns at that time are where ideas of the revolution spread like wildfire, thanks to Thomas Paine. Because he's saying, you know, if God wanted the King of England to rule us, why did he put the Atlantic Ocean between us and them, right? Things like, and some of it's, you know, he's taking shots at them, and some of it, he goes back to antiquity and says, you know, this has never happened before, and part of it is because people just didn't have the chutzpah to do it. Again, Common Sense, great read. Because of Paine, the American population, now I know I said it was a third, but what he does with Common Sense is he brings the population along. If he does not write Common Sense and the Continental Congress declares independence, they're not going to have popular support, right? Common Sense sells 500,000 copies in the first 12 months of its printing. Paine donates every cent to the cause. Common Sense is the #2 bestseller of all time. Any guesses on #1?
Bible.
I got that wrong. I went to Catholic school for 12 years and I got that wrong. So I'm sure the nuns are, not praying for me wherever they may be, but absolutely right. But the point being, 500,000 copies sell in the first year in a population of 2.5 million people. That's unbelievable, right? And again, if you're going to church, you may have it and say, hey, you have to read this. Or I read this great pamphlet, check it out. So pain plays a big, big role in this. So hopping back on the bumpy slide machine here, on the 4th of July, there's one, when it comes time to vote, Pennsylvania is still, it's a coin flip. And Dickinson knows if he votes, he's not going to vote for independence, and it could bring Pennsylvania down to a no vote. So when it comes time to vote, Dickinson steps back and doesn't vote at all. Him not voting is what makes Pennsylvania a yes. There's one colony remaining, Delaware. Delaware has 3 delegates. 1 delegate votes yes, 1 delegate votes no. The 3rd delegate is homesick in bed. His name is Caesar Rodney. He rides 80 miles through the night, through a storm, and I'm sure the story has grown a little bit over the years. But he shows up to vote yes to make it a unanimous declaration of independence. It's why everything in Delaware is named for Caesar Rodney. Rightfully so. I'm not begrudging the man his flowers. But again, it was not a slam dunk. You have several colonies. The South, again, if they keep the slavery paragraph in, the South is out, right? So they remove that. If Dickinson votes, Pennsylvania's out. Pennsylvania's a big, important colony, right? It's basically the capital at the time, right? It's the rebel capital. The British are going to occupy it during the Philadelphia campaign in 1777. So you have all these other machinations happening. Jefferson, afterwards. So this is Jefferson's headstone. And I'm going to read it for those here. The print's a little small, but it says, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia." He thinks the Declaration is his most important accomplishment. Again, a guy who did not want to be here. He wanted to be in Williamsburg, right? What else was he? That's not on the headstone here. President of the United States. He doesn't have it on there. He doubles the size of the country with the Louisiana Purchase, right? Unbelievable. So for the first probably 20 plus years, the Declaration is seen as a very partisan document. You have we think we're polarized today. They were polarized back then. You have 2 parties, and it's really an outgrowth of the Revolution. You have the Federalist Party, which is George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams. They want a strong federal government because of how ineffective the Continental Congress was during the war. Washington, and really it's Alexander Hamilton and John Lawrence who are writing letters to the Continental Congress asking for money, food, uniforms, ammunition, whatever it may be, and the Continental Congress would send it to state governors. State governors' responses would be, so if I'm the state governor of Maryland, and it's not just Maryland, many state governors would respond this way, you get the request, their response was, I'll absolutely contribute, but only if it helps my state's troops. That's not the mindset here, right? It's not the join or die mindset. They're still seeing themselves as individual colonies, countries, whatever it may be. So the other political party that comes out at this point, they're known as the Anti-Federalists or the Democratic Republicans. Do not confuse them with today's version of those parties, right? Democratic Republicans, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, they think power should be invested in the states, right? So the Federalists think that the Declaration of Independence is too pro-French. which is crazy. The anti-federalists or Democratic Republicans, including the author of the Declaration of Independence, thinks it's too pro-British. When we read it, you're going to hear the laundry list of complaints against the king. It is definitely not a pro-British document. But the point of my rambling, it wasn't celebrated. What truly cements Independence Day and the Declaration of Independence is what happens on July 4th, 1826, 200 years ago today. So, Washington's our first president, right? 2 terms. Then you have Adams. Adams gets replaced by Jefferson, and they basically split from each other. They don't talk to each other for about a decade or more. It's Abigail Adams who says to John, come on, like, be the bigger man, just write a letter. Some of the best letters from this period are the letters, so yes, between Abigail and John Adams, which you can find online at the National Archives and the Massachusetts Historical Society, but also the letters between Jefferson and John Adams. And they, over the next 10, 12 plus years, they exchange letters and they come back together and they talk about all that they accomplished during this founding period. July 4th, 1826, they're both living. They die within hours of each other. Again, if it's a Hollywood movie, you'd say they're trying too hard, right? Jefferson dies first. Adams has no idea. Adams' last words are, Jefferson outlives me, Jefferson survives me. They both die literally same day, hours. That's what locks in Independence Day as a big deal. The start of it. Now, Independence Day doesn't become a national holiday until the Civil War, as a way to bring the Union together. And then during World War II, Franklin Roosevelt passes legislation to also strengthen the holiday. But it's not really until about 1826 that people say, oh my gosh, this really was a big deal, right? As a more unified country. I think we will stop there for now, just so that we have time to read the Declaration. I want to first open it up. Any questions or comments from folks online or anybody here? Fire away.
Any particular reason why George Washington didn't like the Massachusetts militia?
He thought they were dirty, disorganized, yeah.
And it wasn't until von Steuben came along.
Exactly, and right here at Valley Forge, right, von Steuben is, I gave a talk yesterday out in Birdsboro and talked about von Steuben and what happened at Valley Forge. Von Steuben is such an important guy, but yeah, it's not until then that they really come together and transform and turns the war on its ear. Yes?
Is there any connection between the join or die flag then later turning into the don't tread on me flag as the singular snake, or those are completely
completely different.
Okay.
So the don't tread on me is the Gadsden flag. It was created by Christopher Gadsden during the Revolutionary period in South Carolina. So, and it's a good question. The snake is very symbolic. Another very symbolic symbol, my English teacher's rolling in her grave, is the pine tree. So if you look at the Bunker Hill flag, it is blue with the cross of St. George and a pine tree in it. The pine tree represents life. Many New England militia units had the pine tree in it, right? Some of the more southern units have the snake in one way, shape, or form. So good question though, thank you.
Just because of the relation between the signer Lee and Robert E. Lee.
Right.
Is the other signer Sherman related to General Sherman by any chance?
No.
Okay.
No, they are not. They are not. Good question. Good question. But you have others, and you know, it's 56 who sign, right? You have others through history who are related. Our brother-in-law is related to Charles Carroll. Dennis. Yeah. So, pretty cool stuff.
Jim, something I've never thought of, or just occurring to me now. How long after the Revolutionary War did was Britain, or Great Britain, England, whatever, viewed as an ally? Or did they become an ally? It doesn't, because this doesn't play a big role in British history.
No.
You know, they don't, it's not something they really give a whole lot of thought to.
So it's kind of funny, I gave a talk about a week ago in West Grove, and the director there is British, and this was the talk. And I said, I am so sorry. He's like, hey, I chose to come to America. It's okay. I'm like, there's always going to be a July 4th, right? Like, we didn't win. But to your point, so the British, after the Treaty of Paris is signed, they maintain forts in the Northwest, which is basically Detroit, right? And a little bit further west, because they can't believe they lost. Well, it's also why the War of 1812 happens, because they say, you know what? We lost last time, we're gonna win this time. Doesn't happen. And it's really not until later in the 1800s, and truly it's World War I, right? That really cements that. Because even during the Civil War, it was kind of the British actually were talking about maybe coming in and arbitrating a peace deal between the North and the South, and it terrified Franklin. And the thought was, the South thought that Europe needs our cotton so badly, if we can hang on long enough, they're going to come to our aid and end this thing. But it's really not, and Britain is arguably our strongest ally, right? Which is irony of ironies. I mean, when they write the Constitution and ratify it in the late 1780s, the Founding Fathers think that the best Constitution on record is Great Britain's. Again, crazy, right? Like, okay, well then why did you guys leave them? We know why, but to your point. So yeah, it takes a while, but yeah, it's after the War of 1812, the British kind of leave us alone and say, okay, we gave it a shot. We burned we burned D.C., we burned Jefferson's, Monticello, on and on and on, but it takes a while for that to happen.
Well, they had an empire to keep track of anyway, so they had
Exactly.
plenty of things to keep them
Right.
busy.
And truly, and to your point actually, or to that point about the empire, the American Revolution is a small piece of the puzzle for the British during this period, because they're down in the West Indies, in the Caribbean. They're all over Europe. After the French and Indian War, the famous saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire, comes to being because it's so massive. And their concern is, hey, if India looks at what's going on in North America, we're gonna have a problem there. So some of the, not scapegoats, but let's say British generals who don't really acquit themselves here in America do wonders elsewhere in the empire after the Revolution. The Howes become Sir William Howe and Sir Richard Howe because of what they accomplished after the fact.
Couple questions from Zoom.
Sure.
First one, how important was Ben Franklin's part in the Declaration of Independence? I am somewhat surprised he was not asked to write it.
Extremely important, because he truly makes, you could say outside of taking, I think it's more important, and this and $1 will get you a cup of coffee at Wawa, my opinion, but I think his change from, sacred and unalterable to self-evident is such an important change. And also, he contributes other parts. It's not that Jefferson wrote the whole thing and then he gives it to the rest of the committee. They also make contributions. The list of grievances that we are going to read, the source for that, big source, is Robert Livingston. Robert Livingston was the first chancellor of New York State, which is basically their state Supreme Court justice. Noted legal mind. He has descendants here in Radnor. Very cool. So does Richard Henry Lee, so does Aaron Burr. Like, wild that all those folks are, all those connections are here. But yeah, no. And the other thing, the other important role that Franklin plays is Franklin at that time is arguably the most famous, if not most famous American on earth, right? Because of what he accomplishes with his electrical experiments and things like that. So he absolutely plays a big role in this.
And the other question right now is, given the heat this week, did the heat in Philadelphia play any role in the signing process?
Yes. So it probably made, and I'm just extrapolating, I'm sure it made John Adams less bearable to be around, because we were talking about it earlier. At the State House, they shut all the windows because they wanted the utmost privacy. Because again, you have loyalists in Philadelphia, and if they hear, hey, wait, they're talking about independence in there, everybody who signs that. So Franklin's famous line is, somebody says we should all hang together, and meaning come together, and Franklin says if we don't, we will definitely all hang separately. They're all traitors, right? So their fear, and it's also one reason why the year after the Declaration is signed, they forget about July 2nd, because none of those guys are around. They're afraid they're going to be picked off as traitors, right? If they're caught, imagine catching Ben Franklin, right? Now I'm sure they wouldn't have hung him, but it would be quite a prize, or one of the other founders. So yeah, he definitely plays a big role in this, as it is today, right? Good questions, thank you. All
That's all
right.
for the moment.
Okay, if that's it for the moment, why don't we go forth with our reading of the Declaration?
Yes.
Thanks to our volunteers who are going to do this.
In Congress, July 4, 1776, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present king of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, He has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people will relinquish the right of representation in the legislation or legislator, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of inalienation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and compulsions within.
He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for the purpose of obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries, so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies.
For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilization. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. We have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and peace friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress, assembled appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things with independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives and fortunes and our sacred oath.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for reading. I really appreciate that. One last thing I want to show to the group on Zoom is I have a website, the Local History Geek. I know it's hard to imagine that.
I can't see
Oh,
it.
you can't see this?
You have to share. Stop sharing your slides.
Oh,
and,
I'm sorry,
and
folks.
Share the.
This is why Mark is here. Here we go. This should do it.
There you go. Good.
Aren't you glad I shared that screen, everyone online? I'm sure you are. The one thing I wanted to show you is down here, this button. I've got about 50 videos that I put together, many during COVID lockdown. So the technology isn't nearly as good as Zoom. It's Facebook Live, but it's good enough. I started with the French and Indian War, made it through to the Civil War, and then my wife said, if you don't stop, our marriage is over, so I had to stop. But the other thing I've got here is on my calendars, I have upcoming talks. So there is no better way to beat the heat than to come to a history talk, as everyone here at the library can tell you, right? But truly, I want to thank Mark, I want to thank the library, I want to thank all of you here in person, online, for joining, and hope that you have a phenomenal semi-quincentennial. Thank you all very much, appreciate it.
Good.